Thumbelina by Hans Christian Andersen. There once was a woman who so wanted to have a tiny little child, but she did not know where to find one. So she went to an old wise woman and said, "I have set my heart upon having a tiny little child. Please could you tell me where I can find one?" "That's easily done," said the wise woman. "Here's a grain of barley for you, but it isn't at all the sort of barley farmers grow in their fields or the barley that chickens get to eat. No, put this grain in a flower pot and you shall see what you shall see." "Oh, thank you." And she gave the woman 12 pennies and planted the barley seed as soon as she got home. It quickly grew into a fine large flower, which looked very much like a tulip bud. "What a pretty flower," said the woman, and kissed its lovely petals. And just as she kissed the flower, it gave a loud pop and flew open. It was indeed a tulip, but on the green cushion in the middle of it sat a little girl. She was ever so dainty and fair, and was no taller than a thumb, and so she named her Thumbelina. The shell from a walnut served as her cradle. Her mattress was made of the blue petals of violets, and a rose petal was pulled up to cover her. That was how she slept at night. In the daytime, she played on a table where the woman had put a plate surrounded with a wreath of flowers. Their stems lay in the water, on which there floated a large tulip petal. Thumbelina used the petal as a boat, and with a pair of white horsehairs for oars, she could row clear across the plate. She could sing, too. Her voice was the softest that anyone had ever heard. One night, as she lay in her cradle, a horrible toad hopped in through the window as one of the panes was broken. The big, ugly, slimy toad jumped right down on the table where Thumbelina was asleep. "Here's a perfect wife for my son," the toad exclaimed, and hopped off out of the window and into the garden with the walnut shell in which Thumbelina lay asleep. A big broad stream ran through the garden with a muddy marsh along its banks, and here the toad lived with her son. Oh, he was just like his mother, slimy and horrible. Was all he could say when he saw the little girl in the walnut shell. "Don't speak so loud, or you will wake her up," the old toad told him. "She might get away from us. We must put her on the broad water lily leaves out in the stream. She's so small and light that it will be just like an island to her, and she can't run away from us while we are making the best room under the mud ready for the two of you to live in." And so she placed the walnut shell with Thumbelina still asleep in it on the largest leaf that lay furthest from the bank. When Thumbelina woke up the next morning and saw where she was and realized there was water all around the leaf and there was no way at all for her to reach the shore, she began to cry. Meanwhile, the old toad in the mud was happily preparing and decorating a room with green rushes and yellow water lilies to have it look its best for the new daughter-in-law. Then, with her son, they came out to the leaf, for her pretty little bed had to be placed in the bridal chamber before they took Thumbelina there. The old toad curtsied deep in the water and said, "Meet my son. He is to be your husband, and you will share a delightful home in the mud," was all her son could say. And then they took the pretty little bed and swam away with it. Left all alone on the green leaf, Thumbelina sat down and wept. She did not want to live in the slimy toad's house, and she didn't want to have the toad's horrible son for her husband. The little fish who swam in the water beneath her had seen the toad and heard what she had said. So their heads to have a look at the little girl. Oh, no sooner had they seen her than that they felt so sorry that anyone so pretty should have to go down to live with that hideous toad. No, no, that should never be. They gathered around the green stem of the leaf and gnawed it in two with their teeth. And away went the leaf down the stream, and away went Thumbelina, far away, where the toad would not be able to catch her. She sailed past many a place, and when the little birds in the bushes saw her, they sang, "Oh, what a darling little girl!" The leaf drifted further and further away with her, and so it was that Thumbelina became a traveller. She was happy again, now that the toad could not catch her. A lovely butterfly kept fluttering around her, and at last alighted on the leaf. She undid her sash, tied one end of it to the butterfly, and the other to the leaf, and so she went much faster now. Just then a big May-bug flew by, caught sight of her, and fastened his claws around her slender waist and flew up with her into a tree. Away went the green leaf down the stream, and away went the butterfly with it, for it was tied to the leaf and could not get loose. Thumbelina was so sorry for the butterfly, who she had fastened onto the leaf. It could not be able to get loose, and might starve to death. But this was not something the May-bug seemed very concerned about. He sat Thumbelina down on a large green leaf and fed her honey from the flowers, and told her that, considering that she didn't look anything like a May-bug, was rather pretty. When all the other May-bugs came over to pay them a call, they stared at Thumbelina, threw up their feelers, and said, "Why, she's only 2 legs. What a miserable sight!" "She hasn't any feelers," the others cried. "She's pinched in at the waist. How shameful! She looks like a human being. Ugh, how ugly she looks," said all the female May-bugs. Of course, Thumbelina was as pretty as ever. Even the May-bug that had flown her up into the tree knew that. But as every last one of them kept calling her ugly, he at length came to agree with them, and he too would have nothing to do with her. In fact, she could go wherever she chose. He flew her out of the tree and left her on a daisy, where she sat and cried, because she now believed she was so ugly. Nevertheless, she was the loveliest little girl you can imagine, and as frail and fine as the petal of a rose. And so all summer long Thumbelina lived alone in the woods. She wove herself a hammock of grass and hung it under a big burdock leaf to keep off the rain. She took honey from the flowers for food and drank the dew which she found on the leaves every morning. In this way the summer and fall went by. Then came the winter. The long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung so sweetly for her flew away. The trees and the flowers withered. The big burdock leaf under which she had lived shriveled up until nothing was left of it but a dry yellow stalk. Thumbelina was terribly cold, for her clothes had worn threadbare, and she herself was so slender and frail. Snow began to fall, and every time a snowflake struck her, it was as if she had been hit by a whole shovelful, for remember, she was only an inch tall. She wrapped a withered leaf about her, but there was no warmth in it. She shivered with cold. Near the edge of the woods was a large grain field, but the grain had been harvested long ago. Only the dry, bare stubble stuck out of the frozen ground, and oh, how she shivered with cold. She then came to the door of a field mouse who had a little hole amidst the stubble. Ooh, it looked warm and cosy, with a whole storeroom of grain and a magnificent kitchen and pantry. Thumbelina stood at the door and pled for a little bit of barley. "Why, you poor thing," said the field mouse, who took a fancy to Thumbelina and turned out to be a kind-hearted old creature. "You must come into my warm room and share my dinner. If you care to, you may stay with me all winter, but you must help me keep my room tidy. Oh, and I hope you can tell me stories. Oh, for I am so fond of them." Thumbelina did as the kind old field mouse had asked, and was happy to stay warm and share. "Soon we will have a visitor. It's my neighbour. You'll see he's even better off than I am. His rooms are large, and he wears a beautiful velvet coat. If you could only get him for a husband, you would be well taken care of. He can't see anything, so you must tell him the very best stories you know." Thumbelina did not like the sound of this suggestion. The neighbour was a mole. The field mouse kept mentioning how wealthy and how wise he was, and how his home was more than 20 times larger than hers. But for all of his knowledge, he cared nothing at all for the sun or for the flowers. He had nothing good to say for them, and had never laid eyes on them. Thumbelina was asked to sing for him, and so she sang for him. The mole fell in love with her immediately, for she had ever such a sweet and pleasant voice. However, he prided himself in being a discreet fellow, and didn't say anything about it quite yet. He invited the field mouse and Thumbelina to use the long tunnel he had just dug through the ground from his house to theirs whenever they pleased, though he warned them not to be alarmed by the dead bird which lay in the passage. The mole took in his mouth a torch of decayed wood that glimmered like fire in the darkness, and went ahead of them to light the way, and when they came to where the dead bird lay, the mole put his broad nose to the ceiling and made a large hole through which daylight could fall. There, in the middle of the floor, lay a dead swallow, with his lovely wings folded at his sides and his head tucked under his feathers. Thumbelina felt sorry for it. She loved all the little birds who had sung so sweetly and twittered for her all through the summer. The mole, however, gave the bird a kick with his short stumps and said, "Now he won't be chirping any more. What a wretched thing it is to be born a little bird. Thank goodness none of my children can be born a bird. All this chirp, 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 and then all they get to do is to starve to death when winter comes along." "Yes, you are so right, you sensible man," the field mouse agreed. "What good is all this grand chirping when you end up starving and freezing in winter time?" Thumbelina kept silent, but when the others turned their back on the bird, she bent over, smoothed aside the feathers that had hid the bird's head, and kissed his closed eyes. The mole closed up the hole that let in the daylight, and then he took the ladies home. That night Thumbelina could not sleep a wink, so she got up and wove a fine large coverlet out of hay. She took it to the dead bird and spread it over him so he would lie warm in the cold earth. She tucked him in and said, "Goodbye, you pretty little bird. Maybe it was you who sang so sweetly to me in the summer-time. Oh, what pleasure it gave me to hear you sing, my sweet, dear, pretty bird."